guys, and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. Not super Q&A today, just regular, good old-fashioned Q&A. I did want to address some of the things that have been going on, some of the comments you guys have left me. Now, first of all, contests. Remember about a month ago, maybe even coming up on 2 months ago, where I talked about how lots of contests are going on with the channel? They are still live. In the description, you can submit some art if you like for that competition, but liking the videos and stuff is still going on, and I'm going to give out a ton of rewards all on Christmas Day this year. So we are winding closer, obviously, and this is one of the last warnings I'm going to give people. The contests are still going on, and just wanted to remind you all. But yeah, we had some interesting discussion on the previous Q&A. First of all, talking about the idea of multi-boxing. This is the concept of running 2 versions of Guild Wars 2 at once, 2 different clients, and it actually is okay. I found a dev post a little bit later talking about it, and people have brought to my attention at least 3 different means of doing so. It's just the idea of broadcasting the same action to multiple clients all at once, which some of these things have built in. That's where you're going to get banned. That's where we're going to have problems, because that's where you're doing one action on the keyboard to make multiple actions on other characters all at once. That's when we get into, like, botting territory, right? So that's kind of the distinction there. The other thing as well was, I'm sorry, everyone, on the previous Q&A, yeah, I said a spoiler. I said what happened to Air in Heart of Thorns. Listen, guys, it's been months now. I'm not going to hide from spoilers. Look, if you still haven't played the story to this point, I really don't care if I spoil you. I'm just going to be honest. I mean, if you really cared that much about the story, surely you would have played it by now. There will be spoilers. You're just going to have to accept that fact as we go forward, because otherwise I'm going to be pussyfooting around every other comment on all my videos, and that's just not reasonable to expect. So thought I'd mention that, and let's move on into the questions. The first one comes from Kevin J, who said 2 days ago, do you think Heart of Thorns was released too early? Oh, here we go. It's straight into a big one. You once claimed, around the time the October release date was announced, that you would have preferred the game's release to be held off if that also meant we could be assured more content would be included. With Heart of Thorns release, sure enough, a lot was left unfinished, notably Fractals, World vs. World, Guild Halls. I found it funny there, Kevin, that your examples don't include the story. He says, I'd argue that masteries were hastily implemented too. It feels like the expansion is still in development. Would the game be better off if they had pushed out to early 2016 instead of releasing in bursts? You're actually right to remember that, and I do still stand by what I said back then, even with how, in my eyes, successful the Heart of Thorns release was. From a technical standpoint, the game was clearly ready to be released. Now, some of you are going to get tunnel vision and focus on specific, like, class balance bugs or stalling issues with individual events. But as far as MMOs go and expansion releases go, they pushed that switch. They told us when it was going to be. They didn't really even let us preload. We downloaded the patch super fast. We were in the game. There were lots of massive structural changes to Guild Wars 2, and there weren't any ridiculous server issues or significant client break issues until a while later, when those bugs started appearing and we got the 64-bit client. I actually think they had a very smooth launch from a technical standpoint. But yes, things feel unfinished to me, and it's not so much the fact that they release things in phases. I actually would argue that even if they pushed it back to January for release date, I still think it would have been a healthy thing to release raids a little bit after the regular release, and to release the leagues a little bit after the regular release, and to push some of these things a little bit back. Perhaps Squad UI and the new legendaries could have and should have been bundled in with Heart of Thorns right from the get-go, but we're talking such a short period of time between the release of the expansion and the release of those patches anyway. I think it's not too big of a point of discussion for me. The main thing, though, is the actual content we got in the game. And as I've mentioned very recently to people, I think looking back at the story and, you know, Heart of Thorns as it was released, in a nutshell, the issue for me with the story was a lack of quantity. The pacing issues that they suffered from, the sudden jumps and weird conclusions and plot points that they tried to push on us that in principle were cool. Like the idea of killing Traherne at the end of the story is a cool plot point in principle. It was just thrown at us too quickly. I think these are all problems that just came about by a lack of quantity. And more quantity is what you would get with a January 2016 release rather than an October 2015 release. But then what do I know, right? I'm a patient guy. I would have waited for more story, more maps, More polish as well. I mean, there's only a certain level of polish you can hope to hit. I don't believe that if they pushed it off till January, we suddenly would have had some flawless, bug-free experience. You're kidding yourself if you expect that. A lot of bugs only make themselves visible when exposed to thousands of people playing through the game at once, and that would have been the same if they'd released in January anyway, but there would have been more quantity there. Just look at the way that the story was done and how fast Act 3 segues into Act 2, which is only 2 missions and then it's all over, right? Like, the story was actually pretty good, and if it didn't suddenly speed up in those last 3 instances and it had been more, you know, evenly paced, I think I would have been a lot happier about it, and that's what that later release date would have brought us. But then that's just me. I'm not a marketing guy. Probably was smart of them to release it before the holiday season, right? People are going to be buying Heart of Thorns for Christmas. A lot of us won't be thinking this, but they will be. This is when money becomes available, and this is when more people will be checking the game out. It's longer for people to try it out through free to play for the next expansion. It gets the ball on the move, and what you have to think about as well from a community perspective, and with less patient people, there was a lot of talk before Heart of Thorns, even despite the magnificent amount of news and spreading out of information we had, which I think ArenaNet handled very well, especially from the perspective of me as a content creator and someone who always wanted lots of news to talk about. I felt like there was a lot, but there were people saying, you know, that they announced the expansion too early and they were waiting too long. People heard about the announcement of Heart of Thorns back in February, and there's this idea that they're only going to wait so long for the actual release. And what, you're expecting those people to wait a whole year? But then ArenaNet couldn't have delayed the actual release and the announcement too, because the game was in dire straits without the existence of an expansion at all on the horizon, and everything was just a little bit difficult. It was a delicate thing. Things like Fallout 4 coming out definitely threw spanners in the works. My way still would have had January, I think, but I don't really have an expert opinion. Next question is from Tirak, who said, could you please do a series on the lore of all the fractals, or fractalies as he types it. I don't think I'll ever do them all, and even if I do, I won't know the lore probably. Funny enough, my friend, you will actually notice on my channel there is a lore series on the fractals, but I only did 2 episodes of it. Actually, after Guild Wars 2 originally came out, around Christmas of that year, I got very, very frustrated with the community and all the, in my opinion, hyperbole and unnecessary frustration at Ascended gear. And for that Christmas, for a period of about 2 to 3 months, I didn't upload any videos. There was even like a couple of threads that appeared of people saying, where's Wooden Potatoes? Like, what's going on? It was basically, I was just PvPing through this time. I wasn't really feeling doing videos. But right before that hiatus, I did a video on Fractals lore. And after the hiatus ended, I did another one. But people just weren't that interested. And why? Well, the Fractals are interesting. And certainly the uncategorized Fractal is far more interesting given Heart of Thorns now. But because they are so existing in a vacuum, the fact is, there's not too much to speculate about. Like, you can talk about the Cliffside Fractal and how cool that giant guy is, but, you know, what have you really got to draw from? Okay, he looks like a Colossus. We've got the season of the Colossus. There's kind of weird Canthery ideas, but you can't build it into some big, cool story. You can't tie it all together into some awesome crackpot theory that right or wrong enthuses people. And so it just kind of petered away. Not to mention the fact that many of the new Fractals we've seen now are just repurposed Season 1 lore. I doubt you'll see it from me unless we see another big Fractal update where they add tons more, and then I'll keep on top of those ones. But yeah, there are 2 videos already out that cover maybe 6 or 7 Fractals as it stands. Next question is from CT McGrew. Pretty cool name. Who says, people are flooding away from Guild Wars 2. Why is that? This is a funny question to me. It comes up pretty much, as far as I can tell, in every community of an actively updated game, that the idea is that, you know, there's some notion that it has to have a very big active community at all times, which MMOs fall into. Every time there's some big release, people always start saying this. I think what you really have to understand is that when people on an individual level decide that they don't want to play a game anymore, they're going to very openly try and make out like their experience, their desire to leave, is the same as everyone else's. Because we like to think that we're the same as everyone else. In truth, I think it's to be expected that Guild Wars 2 is a game that people would leave after they finished playing through it. If there is any MMO in existence that it encourages you or allows you to leave, to come and go as you please, and the keyword there being come back, right? It's Guild Wars 2, right? Like, there's no subscription fee, there's no ridiculous power creep, there's no particularly restrictive grind things in the game. Any grind is optional grind, is for cosmetic stuff and quality of life stuff like legendary weapons and completing collections and so on. People will overblow the importance of ascended gear, specifically ascended armor, and so a lot of the grind's kind of optional. So people will finish the story, they'll finish what's there, and they'll leave. And Heart of Thorns didn't offer too much in terms of exploration and story, so of course people are going to go. They were going to go anyway. The key thing really to understand here is that when the expansion releases, a ton of new people are going to arrive. Is that spike going to stay maxed out forevermore? No. You're living in Cloud Cuckoo Land if you think that's going to happen. People are going to come, they're going to experience the new stuff, then they're going to leave until season 3 comes out, or until Super Adventure Books comes out, or indeed until the next expansion altogether comes out. And then they'll return again, and hopefully then the next spike for the next expansion is the same size. What we're looking for, guys, is that after people flood away again, which they will, the ambient level, the general amount of people, the population of Guild Wars 2 that stays bubbling around is bigger post-Heart of Thorns than pre-Heart of Thorns. And that's a very difficult thing to understand, to grasp, to know where that is. For some places, ArenaNet have been very explicit about this actually having been successful, specifically PvP. You know, they're always talking to us now. PvP has got the most population than we've ever seen. PvP is growing. PvP is growing. I doubt the leagues have impacted that in a negative way at all. Again, you know, I've been playing loads of PvP now specifically because of the leagues. And so in some areas that will be true. In others, I suspect right now that's not true. Like World versus World could be emptier now, maybe, than it was this time a year ago. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. So that's really what you want to look at. To put this bluntly and precisely, yes, people are leaving Guild Wars 2. It's not a bad thing. It's the casual MMO. It's the come and go MMO. You're allowed to do that. It's totally fine. And of course it's expected, not just for Guild Wars 2, but for any game out there in existence. Where the discussion gets really interesting is where our bubbling level is at. And I'm very curious to see if ArenaNet gives us any insights there. Because so far, there is no single player in the entire community who can actually tell you Guild Wars 2 is dying, or some ridiculous notion like this, because we simply don't have those stats. We don't know that it's lower post-Heart of Thorns than pre-Heart of Thorns. Alright, the next question is from Mokar, who says, why, in your opinion, didn't ArenaNet come up with the sort of victory celebration like the one after Zaitan's death? We only got a short cutscene and a few lines from our allies. No word about what happened after that. I don't think the character runs over to the rescue pack soldiers in the raid directly after Morji's been killed. Yeah, this is pretty interesting, especially now that you point out the raid. The fact that, you know, we're now in the raid magically, and it's like there's some weird, you know, time slip that's occurred and we've just missed out on some key stuff. I think this really comes down to 50-50. 50% that it was rushed, all right? And I cannot understate this. This is what we were talking about in a previous question. The story was rushed. It's so obvious from late Act 3 into Act 4. They let it get away from them. And I think that all things considered, if they had more time in a perfect world, they would have had more of a conclusion in place. I think that's just absolutely something they would have wanted. We actually saw this before as well in Season 1 of Living World, by the way, guys, where they retroactively kind of added a conclusion and recap patch, a mini Living World patch, that was staged in Marjorie Delacroix's The Dead End Bar. A few of you guys should remember that, which we may see with Heart of Thorns. But I think it's 50% that it was rushed and it ran away from them, but also 50% that we're just moving straight into Living World Season 3 now. And let's look at this from the perspective of someone 3 years on. Somebody who runs through the personal story. Let's live in Cloud Cuckoo Land for a second and assume that this is, you know, a wonderfully revamped, beautiful personal story, okay? They go all the way through this. They go all the way through Season 1, because that's been released as well, and through Season 2, into Heart of Thorns. Do they really want, okay, like a really long celebration thing that puts a big cork and a big stopper in the story right when things seem like they lead into each other so comfortably, so smoothly? And I think the answer to that question is no. I think that you just kind of want to roll very naturally into Season 3 and then beyond there. And actually, this works from a narrative perspective too, not just like because it would break the pace too much to play it all in one big chunk, having a big like pause and a big break. In theory, because look at the way that Morgemorth was actually dealt with. And specifically, let's compare the death of Zaitan with the death of Morgemorth. Zaitan awakens, raises an entire continent, creates tidal waves, affects majorly civilization for those on the Crichton coastlines. Everything that happens with Lion's Arch, there's major influence just from that alone, let alone the undead rising, the undead, migrations, pushing through the Steam Spur Mountains, pushing north, aggressing the Sylvari, and, impacting a lot of stuff alone, right? You got years of that. Then you have the actual personal story where, once again, Zhaitan has a huge influence, a massive assault on Lion's Arch, on the Free Peoples, the formation of the Pact, multiple Sylvari wild hunts going on, a huge war effort, the banding together of 3 major orders, and generally just a fairly large-scale epic story that presumably takes place across many months, all right? That's Zhaitan. So then it kind of makes sense after this long, epic kind of arc, you have a big, nice celebration. Morgemoth, by comparison, crazy Sylvari attacks Lion's Arch. So we do have that again, all right? But not really directly, at least from the player's perspective, the character's perspective, initially from Morgemoth directly. So we have a big attack on Lion's Arch. Morgemoth awakens. Then what happens? We have the Grove gets attacked by a dragon. We have a bit of a prance about in the past. We have the Pact, they do form up their airships. This seems to happen much quicker, though. They're much more ready. They fly over, they get shot down. An individual group of people just kind of wander their way into Morgemoth's territory and kill him. And Morgemoth's impact on the real world is very marginal. It's like an attack on the Grove, sort of an attack on Lion's Arch, some vines appearing, at one point in the Shiver Peaks, at one point in the Charlands. Not major, right? And so there, it happened a lot shorter. Not to mention all the segues now into future stories with Glint's legacy. That idea of a big celebration, I think, can be cut, I guess. So it works from both perspectives, but again, I do think 50% of it is just, hey, this was rushed. You can do, a nice celebration instance that also doesn't cause this giant halt and cork in the storyline. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas anyway. But I think the fact that they rushed just meant they thought, let's leave it. It kind of works without it. All right, next question is from Viator Eagle, who said, WP, do you think that the Chuck could have been made by the Novus crew to fight the Elder Dragons, and they got free and became the treat that they are today? Cool theory, because of course the Chuck are very interesting creatures, is that they're sort of like draconic creatures. They feed on magic, guys, on ley line energy. This is draconic stuff, but they have no dragon, as far as we know. They're not linked to any kind of dragon thing. We know that the Ratanovans interacted heavily with the Chuck. We know that the Ratanovans were researching ways to defeat the Elder Dragons. And cutting off their food supply is a nice idea. So I do think that there's room for this. However, I do also remember that there's a place in Rata Novus, or like one of the notes, basically telling the story of the Chuck from the outside coming in and aggressing the Ratanovans, like there was some external force from the surface that was coming down to aggress them, which very much made it seem like they were separate. And that there wasn't this weird linking story between them. But I think you can have your cake and eat it too there. I think there could, in theory, have been a couple of Ratanovans experimenters or inventors or inquisitors that were trying stuff out, accidentally created the Chuck, thought they'd got rid of them, and then they grew into this massive threat that everyone en masse in the city had to run away from. So we'll see, but some evidence is a little contradictory to the idea. Next, we've got Flame Dark Flare, who said, my question to you, WP, is, have you found any fun bunker builds with elite specializations? I've been personally enjoying a super fun scrapper build that has so much sustain, I can full heal from 10% health twice, been using it to great avail in PvP. Thoughts on the other classes? I think a lot of new people to PvP, and I'm not saying you're necessarily a new person to PvP here, but I think a lot of people struggle with a simple thing. Being a bunker in PvP doesn't mean just tanking. If all you can do is soak up a ton of damage, you're not actually that useful, because you're just going to get ignored and you're not going to contribute. What a good node holder needs to be is, yes, highly sustainable, but you need other things too. You need methods of supporting your team. You need ways of securing stomps. You need methods of providing lots of heals or Condi Cleanse or might or quickness or evades, as Chronomancers currently do. This is why bunky Chronomancers are currently excelling right now. You need ways to be able to get fast pickups. These are what makes you a good node holder and bunker. It's those extra things. Without them, you just get ignored by the enemy team until eventually you're 1v3 and they'll kill you anyway. You can't get that bunky. All that said, though, moving away from PvP, I do really like the idea of super sustainy bunky builds. I'm looking very much at a Tempest variant. I have played super tanky Elementalist before, and I think Tempest offers some interesting stuff to the mix because they get stronger protection for themselves. So I am looking forward to that. These things have been fascinating me. Not just Tempest is sort of capable, but Reaper as well. Reaper can stack enough damage modifiers like Protection and Frost Aura and Rise. And if you stack enough of these together, you can actually get over 100% damage reduction. And you will be getting hit for zeros. Very much like the old Protective Spirit Shield of Absorption combo from Guild Wars 1. So they can kind of do that, as can Revenants. Revenants can do it through Jarlis. It's exciting stuff, and the Revenant one specifically I actually read about in a thread on Reddit of interesting things about the Revenant, which is really cool. Actually, the most fun thing I was talking to a friend about from that thread, and you guys might not know this, really cool combo you can do as a Glint, a Glint Revenant with a hammer, is you can use the hammer ability at 1200 range that blinks you temporarily far away, and your entire body will move all that distance away. So you can use that, and at the very distance of your hammer jump, you can pop the Glint facet that pulses a reveal in the area. So you can you can teleport miles away, like say there's a shadow refuge really far away from you, you can blink instantly into it with your hammer, pop the pulse reveal, and then blink back to safety, immediately revealing whoever you want. There's some cool combos with Revenant. But yeah, the tanky idea is certainly very exciting too. Alright, got two more. I'll try and get through them very quickly. Arutha Silverthorn said, "Morning, WP. You say your interest in raiding is waning. So, when do you think it would be appropriate to release a second wing? Of course, considering the larger community as well." Actually, I take back my comments that my interest in raiding is waning. Now that progression is over, this idea that the group of people I run with have just been practicing, now that we're pretty good at it, raiding has kind of settled into this really kind of cool place. People were complaining about raid rewards a little. I've certainly not identified with that. And I have actually found myself really looking forward to raid reset after the week is up, because now that we can do it comfortably, it's a lot of fun to see the progress that your group's made. To see that we can go in there and one-shot the Veil Guardian, two-shot Gorseval, and like two-shot Sabbather, as we did this week. To be done with the entire thing, sans, build messing around or waiting around. To be done with the entire thing in like 40 minutes or something, right? Cutting all the fat away. It's really cool and highly rewarding. You get a lot of gold for it, and you get some great stuff out of those chests too. I got some Ascended chest, Zerka gear. That stuff's cool. I've been enjoying the raiding. It's a lot of fun to see the difference, and I found myself even tempted to just go back in and help my friends just for Magnetite shards. The achievements are pretty good. I've got like 2 or 3 more achievements left to get, so I always feel like there's that extra little goal when we go for it. It's fun. With all that said, I think the next wing should release sometime with Season 3 of The Living World. I would love to hear some statement from ArenaNet about Season 3 coming out soon-ish. I can tell you for a fact, alright, if Leagues hadn't come out for Guild Wars 2, I would only be getting dailies and raid reset night. That's all I'd be doing in the game, and that's all I will do in the game until Living World Season 3 comes out, except that Leagues saved it. That's the only thing that saved it for me, because I'm not interested in crafting a legendary weapon. So, I do think raids, for those people who aren't interested in the PvP at all, would go a long way for the next wing to come out fairly quick. But I think they'll probably start Season 3 before then. Alright, and the last question is from QandA2005, who said, "I got a question. Would Guild Wars 2 have been a better game with humans being the only race as it was in Guild Wars 1? I think that would have removed a lot of work from the devs so they could concentrate on other content." I'm not really sure how much work that would have saved them in the end. It's very feature specific with how much impact the multiple races has on the game, but I will say one thing. I think it would mean we can at least sit in chairs by now, don't you think? Thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Q&A. Leave any more you may have in the comments down below. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.